4 blue trucks surrounded my gate at midnight, headlights blazing like searchlights in a prison yard. I'd owned this bankrupt ranch for exactly 3 weeks and already someone wanted me gone. The woman who stepped out wore a $1,000 suit and carried herself like she owned the entire county. She didn't ask my name. She didn't introduce herself. She just said, "You bought the wrong piece of land." Then she left, but not before her crew planted cameras on my fence posts. That's when I knew this wasn't about the land. This was about what underneath it, and whatever it was they had already killed to get it. I'm Cade Brennan, former commercial pilot, and I just bought my way into a war I didn't even know existed. What I found buried in that basement would either save me or make me the next victim. And hit like, subscribe if you'd like to help the channel grow. That little thanks button down below means a lot. The March wind cut across the Texas panhandle like a blade, dry and relentless, carrying the scent of dust and something older, something that had been here long before I arrived. I stood on the porch of the wooden house, paint peeling in long strips, and looked out over 847 acres of land that now belonged to me. The moon hung low and pale, casting just enough light to see the fence posts marching into the darkness. This was mine now, all of it. Bought at a bankruptcy auction 3 weeks ago for $185,000, a price so low that even the auctioneer had seemed surprised. I'd driven away from that courthouse feeling like I'd finally caught a break after 2 years of watching my life collapse. I lost my job when the airline industry imploded. I lost my wife 6 months later. This ranch was supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to build something with my own hands instead of flying someone else's plane at 35,000 feet. I'd spent the first 2 weeks cleaning out the house, patching holes in the roof, where rain had turned the attic insulation into black mold. The work felt good, physical, real. But tonight, my first night actually sleeping here instead of driving back to the motel in Coldwater, something felt wrong. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that made you listen harder, made your ears strain for sounds that shouldn't be there. I'd learned to trust that instinct in the cockpit, that little voice that said, "Check the instruments again, something's off." Now it was telling me to stay alert. I finished my coffee and walked down the porch steps to check the eastern fence line. The land rolled away in gentle waves covered in dry grass that rustled like paper, and in the distance I could see dark shapes of mesquite trees clustered where water collected after rare rains. That's when I heard them. Engines. Not one, but multiple diesel heavy coming from the direction of the main road. I stopped and turned my hand, instinctively reaching for the flashlight on my belt. Headlights appeared, 4 sets of them bouncing along the dirt access road that led to my gate. My gate. My property. At 10:15 at night. The trucks came into view slowly, deliberately, 4 blue Ford F-350s, arranged in a loose formation like they were executing a practiced maneuver. They reached the gate and stopped, engines still running, and pivoted so their headlights formed a semicircle of blinding white light aimed directly at where I stood. High beams. Industrial strength. The kind that could turn night into day and make you feel like an insect pinned under a microscope. I raised my hand to shield my eyes and took 3 steps forward, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. My heart was hammering, not panic, just adrenaline, the same spike I used to get in the cockpit when the tower called out traffic I hadn't seen yet. Nobody got out at first. The trucks just sat there idling, exhaust rising in white clouds. I could see silhouettes behind the windshields, at least 2 people per vehicle. 8 people, maybe 10. All of them are watching me. I walked closer to the gate and stopped about 15 feet back, close enough to be seen clearly. Far enough to run if I needed to. Then the driver's door of the center truck opened. A woman stepped out. Tall, maybe 5'9", dark hair cut short in a style that said, "I don't have time for nonsense." She wore a black blazer over a white shirt, dark jeans and boots that looked expensive. She moved like someone used to being obeyed. Shoulders back, chin-level eyes scanning me the way a predator sizes up prey. She didn't smile, didn't wave. She just walked up to the gate and stopped, hands in her pockets, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostile exactly, more like evaluating. "You're the new owner," she said. Not a question, a statement. Her voice carried clearly over the sound of the engines, low and controlled. I nodded slowly, keeping my own voice level. "That's right. And you are," she ignored the question. "You bought this property 3 weeks ago at the county auction, $185,000. Cash deal closed in 4 days." My stomach tightened. How did she know that the sale was public record? Sure, but the details, the exact amount, the timeline, that took effort to find. That took someone who'd been watching. "I'm not sure why that's your business," I said carefully. She tilted her head slightly, and in the harsh light I could see her face more clearly now, sharp cheekbones, eyes that were dark and utterly unreadable. "It's my business because you bought the wrong piece of land," she said, and there was something in her tone, not quite a threat, but close. "This property has complications you don't understand. Issues that go back years. You should sell it. Walk away while you still can." The wind picked up, pulling at my jacket, and somewhere behind me I heard loose tin on the barn roof clang against the wall. I kept my eyes on her, my mind racing. A scam. Some kind of intimidation tactic. But that didn't make sense. Why show up with 4 trucks and a crew? If you just wanted to make an offer. "If you want to make an offer, you can call me during business hours," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'm not interested in selling." She studied me for a long moment, and I had the distinct feeling she was recalibrating. Then she reached into her jacket pocket. I tensed and pulled out a business card. She held it up so I could see it in the light, then tucked it into the gap between the gate and the post. "Think about it," she said. "You have 72 hours. Then she turned and walked back to her truck. Without another word, climbed in, and all 4 trucks backed up in unison and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the sudden darkness with only the sound of my own breathing. I waited until the taillights disappeared before I moved. Then I walked to the gate and pulled out the business card. Marlo Vance, CEO, Vance Holdings, LLC. No address, no phone number. Just a name and a company I'd never heard of. I turned and looked back at the house, and that's when I saw them fresh tire tracks in the dirt on the other side of the fence near the electric pole. I walked over and shone my light up the pole, and my blood went cold. 2 small cameras, professional grade, mounted at angles that covered the gate and the approach to the house. They hadn't been there this morning. I was sure of it, which meant they'd been here before tonight. Before Marlo Vance showed up with her trucks and her ultimatum. They'd been watching, planning, waiting. I stood there in the dark, the card still in my hand, and asked myself the question that would haunt me for days. How did they know I'd just bought this place? And more importantly, what did they want badly enough to come here at midnight with cameras and threats and a woman who looked like she'd never lost a negotiation in her life? I didn't have answers yet. But I knew one thing for certain. This land I'd bought for a fresh start, it was hiding something valuable enough to kill for. I woke up at 6 the next morning with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Sunlight filtered through the cracked window above the bed, and for a moment I lay there listening to the sounds of the ranch wind in the eaves, a loose shutter banging somewhere on the north side, the distant caw of a crow. Normal sounds, daylight sounds. But I couldn't shake the image of those 4 trucks, that woman's face in the headlights, the cameras watching me sleep. I pulled on jeans and boots and went outside to walk the fence line, moving methodically from post to post, checking for anything else they might have left behind. That's when I found the second camera, smaller than the first, tucked into the junction box on the electrical pole near the road. Professional equipment, weatherproof, the kind that transmits wirelessly. Someone had invested serious money in surveillance, and that told me more than any threat could. This wasn't amateur hour. This was organized, well-funded, and patient. I drove into Coldwater around 9, needing supplies and hoping to get a read on the town, maybe ask a few careful questions about the previous owner. The hardware store was a sagging building on Main Street, with faded paint and a hand-lettered sign that looked older than me. I walked in with a list, wire cutters, fence staples, a new padlock for the gate, and the man behind the counter looked up, saw me, and his expression shifted from bored to uncomfortable in the space of a heartbeat. "Help you?" he asked, but his tone said he'd rather not. I showed him the list. He glanced at it, then shook his head. "Don't have most of that. Supplier's been delayed." I looked around the store, shelves stocked with everything I'd just asked for, fence staples in 3 different sizes, wire cutters hanging on a pegboard right behind his head. "Right there," I said, pointing. He didn't even look. "Those are spoken for. Special order." I felt my chest tighten, that familiar pressure that came from being lied to by someone who didn't even bother to make it convincing. I thanked him and left without arguing. Same story at the grocery store, half my list suddenly unavailable. At the post office, the clerk told me there was a problem with my address verification, and they couldn't deliver mail until it was resolved, maybe 2 weeks, maybe more. By the time I got back to the truck, the message was clear. Someone had gotten to them first. Someone had bought their silence, their cooperation, their willingness to make my life difficult in 1,000 small ways. I was sitting in the truck, debating my next move, when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I answered. "Mr. Brennan." A woman's voice, crisp and professional. Not Marlo Vance, but someone who worked for her. "This is Iris Calloway, branch manager at Coldwater Regional Bank. I need you to come in this afternoon. We've identified some irregularities in your mortgage file." My stomach dropped. What kind of irregularities? Her tone didn't change, didn't soften. "Better if we discuss it in person. 2 o'clock work for you." I told her I'd be there and hung up, my mind already racing through possibilities. The mortgage had been straightforward, 20% down, standard 30-year fixed rate, approved without hesitation. What could possibly be irregular about it now, 3 weeks after closing, unless it wasn't irregular at all? Unless this was part of the same pattern, the same coordinated pressure. The bank was a low brick building on the edge of town, all tinted windows, and a parking lot that needed repaving. Iris Calloway met me in her office, a woman in her mid-50s, with steel gray hair and a handshake like a vice grip. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We've completed a secondary review of your property," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Our appraisal team has identified potential environmental concerns, soil contamination, and possible heavy metal deposits. Under the terms of your mortgage agreement section, 12B, we're required to order an independent assessment." I opened the folder, pages of dense legal language, but the bottom line was clear. They wanted $45,000 in 15 days, or they'd initiate foreclosure proceedings. "This is insane," I said, keeping my voice level, even though fury was burning in my chest. "Everything was approved. The property was inspected. You can't just change the terms because you feel like it." She folded her hands on the desk, and her expression was carved from stone. "The contract allows for additional assessment if environmental risks are discovered. We're exercising that option. You have 15 days, Mr. Brennan." I left the bank knowing exactly what this was. Marlo Vance hadn't been making a prediction last night. She'd been delivering a schedule. 72 hours to think about her offer. Then the pressure starts. The town turns its back. The bank calls in your loan. Everything you need to survive becomes just out of reach, and the message is clear: sell now or lose everything, the hard way. I drove back to the ranch in silence, my hands tight on the wheel, and when I pulled up to the gate, I saw immediately the padlock I'd put on this morning was missing, replaced with a different one. My key didn't fit. Someone had changed the lock on my own gate. I sat there in the truck engine idling, staring at that lock, and something shifted inside me. Not anger, colder than that. Calculation. The kind of calm I used to feel in the cockpit when an engine failed, and there was no time for panic, only procedure. They thought that they could squeeze me out, thought they could make me desperate enough to take whatever deal they offered. But they'd made a mistake. They'd pushed too hard, too fast, and now I knew this wasn't just about money. This was about something under this land. Something worth enough to orchestrate a bankruptcy, manipulate a bank, and terrorize a man they'd never even met. I pulled out my phone and started searching. Marlo Vance, Vance Holdings, mineral rights, Texas lithium deposits. And by the time the sun went down, I had the beginning of an answer and the beginning of a plan. Day 3 started with a phone call I should have seen coming. The electrical contractor I'd hired to fix the wiring in the barn, scheduled to arrive at 8, left a voicemail at 7:30 saying he couldn't make it. Family emergency. No rescheduled date. I deleted the message and called the backup company I'd found online. They answered on the first ring, listened to my request, asked for my address, and then went silent for 5 full seconds before telling me they were booked solid for the next 4 months. I could hear the lie in the pause and the sudden shift from eager to evasive. The water company was next. I'd submitted the activation request 2 weeks ago, been told it was just a formality and should be running by now. When I called to follow up, the representative told me there was a hold on the account, some issue with water quality testing that needed to be resolved before they could turn on service. How long? Couldn't say. Maybe a week, maybe longer. I stood in the kitchen with my phone in one hand and a bottle of warm water in the other, looking out at 847 acres of land I legally owned but couldn't actually use, and felt the walls closing in. By noon, I'd run the generator twice to keep the fridge from dying, and realized I was burning through fuel faster than I could afford to replace it. The nearest gas station was in Coldwater, and I had a feeling I knew how that would go, but I drove in anyway because I didn't have a choice. The pump took my card. The screen flashed processing for 30 seconds, then see attendant. Inside, the clerk looked at my card, looked at me, and said the system was down, cash only. I paid cash for 10 gallons twice, what it should have cost, and left without arguing, because what was the point? On the way out, I passed the diner, saw trucks in the parking lot, people eating lunch like it was a normal Tuesday, and felt the weight of isolation settle over me like a blanket. These people knew. They had to know. A stranger rolls into town, buys the old bankrupt ranch, and suddenly he's persona non grata. That doesn't happen without everyone being in on it, or at least being too scared to question it. The call from the bank came at 2:14. Not Iris this time, but someone from the legal department. A man's voice, flat and rehearsed, informed me that due to the environmental assessment requirement, my mortgage payment schedule had been adjusted. First installment of the $45,000 due in 15 days. Failure to comply would trigger default proceedings. He didn't ask if I had questions. He just delivered the script and hung up. I sat on the porch steps with the phone still in my hand and did the math. 45,000. I had maybe 12 in savings. The rest of my money was tied up in the property and repairs I'd already paid for and the deposit I'd put down on solar panels that were supposed to arrive next month. Even if I sold everything I owned, truck tools, the few pieces of furniture I'd brought from my old life, I wouldn't come close. They knew that. Iris knew it. Marlo Vance knew it. This wasn't about getting their money. This was about making it impossible for me to stay. That night, the trucks came back. Not 4 this time, just 2. They parked outside the gate at 11 and sat there with engines running for 30 minutes, headlights off, just close enough that I could see their silhouettes in the moonlight. Nobody got out. Nobody approached. They just waited, a silent reminder that they could come whenever they wanted, that I was being watched every hour of every day and there was nothing I could do about it. When they finally left, I went back inside and locked the door, knowing the lock meant nothing. Knowing that if they wanted to come in, they would, and no piece of hardware would stop them. I poured a glass of whiskey I'd been saving for when the house was finished, drank it in 3 swallows, and felt the burn all the way down. Then I sat at the kitchen table and forced myself to think clearly, to push past the anger and fear, and focus on what I actually knew versus what I was assuming. Marlo Vance wanted this land, wanted it badly enough to orchestrate financial pressure, social isolation, psychological warfare. That meant it was worth more than $185,000, worth more than $320 the price she'd offered, worth enough to justify weeks or months of planning enough to buy off a bank manager and half a town. The previous owner had gone bankrupt. That was a public record. But why? What had happened in the year before the auction? What had changed between the moment he bought this place and the moment he lost it? I pulled out my laptop and started searching. The county assessor's website had property records going back 20 years. I found the previous owner's name listed as the last taxpayer of record and plugged it into Google. 3 results. An obituary from 2 years ago for someone with the same name but wrong age. A LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated since 2019. And a scanned document from the Texas Railroad Commission. A geological survey request filed in 2022. I clicked the link and waited for the PDF to load, my heart starting to pound, even though I didn't know yet what I was looking at. But I could feel it. That same instinct that had kept me alive at 35,000 feet. The one that said, pay attention. This is important. This is the thing that changes everything. The document opened. I started reading. And 5 minutes later, I understood exactly why Marlo Vance had shown up at my gate with 4 trucks and a 72-hour deadline. This wasn't about the land at all. It was about what was underneath it. The basement smelled like mildew and old paper, the kind of decay that happens when nobody's been down there in years. I'd avoided it until now, too much work upstairs, too many immediate problems that needed fixing. But the geological survey request had listed the previous owner's name, and something told me if there were answers about what happened to him, they'd be here in whatever he'd left behind. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step protesting like it might give way. At the bottom, I found a space that had once been an office, a metal desk pushed against the far wall, a filing cabinet with 3 drawers hanging open, cardboard boxes stacked in the corner, with water stains blooming across their sides. I started with the desk. Top drawer, pens, paper clips, a calculator with dead batteries. Second drawer, receipts for feed and equipment, all dated 2021 and earlier. Bottom drawer, stuck. I pulled harder, heard something shift inside, and it finally jerked open. Inside was a folder legal size with tabs marking different sections. Tax returns, insurance policies, mortgage statements, and underneath all of it, a yellow envelope with a return address I recognized immediately. Texas Railroad Commission, Mineral Resources Division. My hands weren't quite steady when I pulled out the envelope and opened it. The letter inside was dated August 14, 2022, addressed to the previous owner by name. I read it once quickly, then again slowly, making sure I understood what I was seeing. Preliminary geological survey indicates potential presence of lithium carbonate deposits at depths of 800 to 1,200 feet. Estimated concentration, 1,200 to 1,800 parts per million. Recommend comprehensive drilling survey to confirm viability. Estimated reserve value, pending confirmation, $40 to $60 million. I sat down hard on the concrete floor, the letter still in my hand, and felt the entire situation reorganize itself in my head. 40 to 60 million, not thousands, millions. Lithium, the metal everyone needed for electric car batteries, for power storage, for the entire green energy revolution. And it was here, under this worthless-looking ranch in the middle of nowhere, Texas, buried deep enough that nobody would know unless they went looking, unless they had reason to look. I searched through the rest of the drawer and found receipts from a geological consulting firm, $8,500 for preliminary survey work. Then emails printed and filed between the owner and the survey company. The tone shifted over time. Early messages were excited, optimistic. Later ones grew cautious. The final email was dated November 2022, 3 months after the survey letter. Per your request, we will maintain confidentiality regarding survey results. No public filings have been made. All documentation remains sealed, pending your further instruction. So, he'd known. He'd discovered the lithium, hired experts to confirm it, and then deliberately kept it quiet. Smart move, or it should have been. But something had gone wrong. The property went into foreclosure 14 months later. The owner disappeared, no forwarding address in any of the files, no final correspondence, just a sudden stop to all record keeping in March of 2023. Like someone had flipped a switch and erased him from existence. I pulled out my phone and searched for his name combined with bankruptcy and Texas. 3 results. 2 were unrelated cases. The third was a court filing from April 2023, emergency foreclosure proceeding initiated by Coldwater Regional Bank, citing failure to make payments for 90 consecutive days. Judgment entered by default. No defense filed. Property sold at auction to satisfy debt. The timeline was too clean, too fast. Normal foreclosures took months, sometimes over a year. This had gone from missed payment to auction in less than 90 days, and the owner hadn't even fought it. That wasn't normal. That was someone who'd been given a choice: walk away quietly or face something worse. I stood up, my knees stiff from sitting on cold concrete, and climbed back upstairs with the envelope and all the printed emails. Outside, the afternoon sun was slanting low, turning the grass gold, and the silence felt different now. Not peaceful, watchful. I thought about Marlo Vance and her 4 trucks, thought about Iris and the sudden mortgage irregularities, thought about a man who'd discovered a fortune under his land and somehow lost everything within a year. The pattern was obvious once you saw it. Someone Marlo most likely had found out about the lithium. Maybe she had contacts at the Railroad Commission. Maybe she'd paid someone for access to sealed survey results. However she'd learned, she'd decided that buying the land legitimately was too expensive, too complicated. Better to take it, force the owner into a financial crisis, use the bank to manufacture a foreclosure, buy the property for pennies at auction, clean, legal, untraceable, as long as the owner disappeared quietly and nobody asked too many questions. But I'd gotten in the way, showed up at the auction with cash and a desperate need for a fresh start, and outbid whoever Marlo had planted there to scoop up the property. Now she was trying the same playbook on me. Isolation, financial pressure, psychological warfare. 72 hours to sell, and then the screws start turning. Except I had something the previous owner maybe hadn't. I had the evidence, the letter, the emails, proof that this land was worth tens of millions, and proof that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide that fact. I took photos of every document with my phone, uploaded them to cloud storage, and emailed copies to myself at 3 different addresses. Then I sat on the porch and made a decision. I could sell, take whatever money Marlo offered, and walk away alive and intact with enough to start over somewhere else. Or I could fight, dig in, find a lawyer, build a case, and bet everything on the chance that the law would actually work the way it was supposed to. The smart move, the safe move, was to sell. I'd already lost 1 life to bad luck and worse timing. Why would I risk losing another? But something in me, some stubborn piece of pride or foolishness, or maybe just exhaustion at the idea of running again, refused to bend. I'd spent 2 years watching my marriage collapse, watching my career evaporate, watching every plan I'd made turn to ash. I'd bought this place because I needed to believe I could still build something that would last. And now I was supposed to hand it over because some ruthless businesswoman decided she wanted it more. I pulled up my phone and started searching for lawyers. Not in Coldwater, nobody here could be trusted. Austin maybe. Somewhere far enough away that Marlo's reach hadn't extended yet. I needed someone who specialized in mineral rights, property law, maybe even criminal fraud. Someone who had seen cases like this before and knew how to fight them. The sun was setting by the time I found a name that looked promising, a firm that handled resource disputes with a partner who'd won a case against an oil company 3 years ago. I drafted an email explaining the situation in broad strokes, attached 2 of the documents, and hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I went inside, locked the door, and tried to sleep. But every sound made me flinch, every creak of the house settling, every gust of wind against the windows. Because I knew now what I was up against. Not just money, not just power, but people who had already destroyed one man to get what they wanted. And if I stayed, if I fought, I was betting my life that I could survive what they'd do to destroy me, too. The next morning, my phone rang. Austin area code. A voice I didn't recognize yet, but would come to trust. Mr. Brennan, this is Quinn Aldridge. I got your email. We need to talk. Today. Quinn Aldridge's office was on the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Austin, the kind of building where everyone wore suits and spoke in careful, measured tones. I'd driven 2 hours to get there, watching my rearview mirror the entire way, half expecting to see blue trucks following me. The lawyer was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s maybe, with sharp eyes and a handshake that said he didn't waste time on pleasantries. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, and I sat pulling out my phone to show him the photos I'd taken. He studied each one in silence, zooming in on the geological survey letter, reading the emails twice. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim. "This is textbook forced sales manipulation," he said. "Someone finds out your property has valuable mineral deposits, engineers a financial crisis to force you into foreclosure, buys the land cheap at auction. It's not common, but it happens, usually in oil and gas territories. Lithium's newer, but the playbook's the same." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "Can we prove it?" He tapped the screen. "This letter helps, the timing helps, but we need more. We need to show a direct connection between Marlo Vance and the bank. We need evidence that she knew about the lithium before the foreclosure. And we need to confirm that the deposits are actually there, not just a preliminary survey, but hard data from an independent source." He pulled a legal pad toward him and started writing. "Here's what we do. Step 1, documentation. Every interaction you have with Vance or her people, you record it. Texas is a one-party consent state, which means as long as you're part of the conversation, recording is legal. Audio, video, whatever you can get. Step 2. We hire our own geological survey company. Independent, reputable, no connection to anyone involved. They drill test holes, take samples, confirm what's actually down there. That'll cost about $12,000. I felt my stomach tighten. "I don't have $12,000. He nodded like he'd expected that. "I can defer my fees until we settle or win a judgment. The survey company won't. But if the deposits are real, you'll be able to secure a loan against future mineral rights. Banks love that kind of collateral." Step 3 was building the legal case itself, filing complaints with the Texas Attorney General's office, documenting every instance of coercion, harassment, and financial manipulation. We're looking at potential violations of Texas Penal Code 32.45, coercion in business transactions. If we can prove the bank colluded, that's federal bank fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343. Those are serious charges. Prison time, not just fines. He set down his pen and looked at me directly. "But I need you to understand what you're signing up for. These people already destroyed one man to get this land. They're not going to stop because you hire a lawyer. They're going to escalate. Make your life hell. You need to be ready for that." I thought about the trucks outside my gate, the town that wouldn't sell me supplies, the lock someone had changed on my own property. "I'm already living in hell," I said. "At least this way, I'm fighting back." He smiled faintly. "Good, then let's get to work." The geological survey company agreed to start drilling within 5 days, but only if we kept it quiet. No public announcements, no permits filed until the results were in. Too much attention would bring exactly the kind of interference we were trying to avoid. I left the lawyer's office with a plan, a timeline, and a sick feeling in my gut that I'd just committed to something I couldn't take back. On the drive home, I stopped at an electronics store and bought 6 security cameras with night vision and cloud storage. Bought a small digital recorder that clipped to my belt, barely bigger than a thumb drive. Bought a fireproof lockbox to keep the original documents safe. The cashier rang me up without comment, and I realized how far I was from Coldwater's reach here. Nobody knew me. Nobody cared what I was buying or why. It felt like surfacing for air after being underwater too long. Back at the ranch, I spent the rest of the afternoon installing cameras, 1 at the gate, 2 covering the house from different angles, 1 aimed at the barn, 2 more watching the eastern pasture where the survey team would be drilling. Each camera fed to an app on my phone, recording continuously to the cloud. If Marlo or her people came back, I'd have footage, proof, evidence that could hold up in court. As I worked, I kept thinking about the previous owner, the man whose name I now knew but whose face I'd never seen. Had he fought back? Or had he just folded when the pressure got too intense, signed whatever papers they put in front of him and disappeared? I wanted to believe he'd had good reasons for giving up. Maybe he had a family to protect. Maybe they'd threatened him with something worse than financial ruin. But part of me, the stubborn part that had kept me in the cockpit through engine failures and thunderstorms, couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a mistake. That if he'd just held on a little longer, found the right help, refused to be scared into silence, things might have ended differently. That evening I called the number the lawyer had given me and reached the previous owner's last known contact, a cousin in New Mexico who'd handled the estate after he'd disappeared. The conversation was short and tense. Yes, his cousin had owned the ranch. No, he didn't know why it went into foreclosure so quickly. He just stopped answering calls, the cousin said, voice tight. One day we're talking about Thanksgiving plans, next day, his phone's disconnected and the bank's sending foreclosure notices. I tried to help, but he wouldn't let me. Said it was complicated. Said I should stay out of it. There was a long pause. You think someone hurt him? I chose my words carefully. I think someone scared him. Scared him enough that walking away felt like the only option. Another pause. Then, if you're going after whoever did this, I want to help. He was a good man. Didn't deserve what happened. I took down his information, promised to keep him updated, and hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in days. Not hope exactly. More like purpose. Like I was doing something that mattered beyond just saving my own skin. The lawyer called the next morning with news. The survey team can start the day after tomorrow. They'll need 3 days to drill and collect samples, another 2 to run the lab analysis. 1 week from now, we'll know exactly what you're sitting on. Yet I stood on the porch, phone pressed to my ear, looking out over land that suddenly felt less like a burden and more like a battleground. And if it's real, if the lithium's there. His voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the edge of anticipation underneath. Then we file everything at once. Civil suit against Vance for coercion and fraud, criminal complaint to the Attorney General. We go public, bring in the media, make enough noise that she can't make this disappear quietly. He paused. But Cade, once we start, there's no backing out. She'll know what we're doing. She'll try to stop it. You need to be ready for that. I watched the sunrise paint the grass gold and thought about the cameras, the recordings, the evidence I was building, piece by piece. Let her try, I said. I'm not running anymore. 3 hours later, as I was checking the fence line, I saw dust rising from the access road. 2 trucks this time, blue, moving fast, and I knew 72 hours were up. Now the real fight began. The survey team arrived at 7 in the morning, 3 men in a white truck with drilling equipment strapped to a flatbed trailer. The crew chief was a weathered man in his 60s, who introduced himself with a firm handshake and got straight to work. They had scouted the location from satellite imagery, identified the best spot for the first test hole near the northern boundary, where the geological layers were most accessible. By 8, they had the drill rig assembled and the bit chewing into the ground, the sound of machinery echoing across the empty land. I stood watching, coffee in hand, thinking about how different this felt from everything else I'd done since buying the place. This wasn't defense. This wasn't a reaction. This was me taking control, making something happen, instead of just surviving what others did to me. The morning air was cool, the sky pale blue and cloudless, and for the first time in days, I let myself imagine a future where this actually worked, where the survey confirmed the deposits, where the law worked, the way it was supposed to, where I won. That illusion lasted exactly 90 minutes. At 9:30 I heard engines, multiple, coming fast. I turned and saw them cresting the low rise near the access road, 4 blue trucks in tight formation, throwing up plumes of dust. My chest tightened. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera app, and started recording. The crew chief looked up from the drill rig, frowned, and walked over to where I stood. "Expecting company?" he asked. I shook my head. Not the friendly kind. The trucks didn't slow down. They came straight through the open gate. I'd left it unlocked for the survey team, and fanned out in a semicircle around the drilling site, engines still running. Doors opened. 8 people climbed out, all wearing dark clothing, all moving with the coordinated precision of a security detail. And then Marlo Vance emerged from the center truck, dressed in black jeans and a fitted jacket, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She walked toward us with that same predatory confidence I'd seen the first night, and I noticed the crew chief tense beside me. Marlo stopped 10 feet away, hands in her pockets, and looked past me to the drilling rig. "You need to shut that down," she said. Her voice carried clearly over the noise of the machinery, calm and authoritative. "You're trespassing on disputed property." I kept my phone aimed at her, making sure she knew she was being recorded. "This is my property. Legal deed recorded with the county. You're the one trespassing." She pulled off her sunglasses and looked at me directly. Her eyes were cold, calculating. "Mr. Brennan, you're making this harder than it needs to be. That drilling rig is operating without proper permits. You're violating environmental regulations. I've already contacted the county inspector." The crew chief shifted his weight. "We've got all the permits we need. This is private land, private survey. No county permits required." Marlo ignored him, kept her focus on me. "You don't know what you're doing. This land has geological instabilities. Drill in the wrong place, and you could trigger a collapse, contaminate the aquifer. You'd be liable for millions in damages." I felt my jaw tighten. The threat was obvious, barely disguised. She was laying groundwork for a lawsuit manufacturing liability even as we stood here. "The only contamination here is what you're trying to pull," I said, and I heard the anger creeping into my voice despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You want this land because of what's under it. You know about lithium. You knew before the previous owner went bankrupt. That's why you're here." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or recalculation. She'd assumed I didn't know, assumed I was just some desperate buyer who'd stumbled into her plans. Now she understood I'd done my homework. "If you have evidence of that," she said slowly, "you should take it to a lawyer, but right now you need to stop this drilling. Last chance." I glanced at the crew chief. He was watching Marlo's people, clearly uncomfortable with 8 strangers standing around his equipment. I could see him doing the math. Was this job worth the confrontation? Would his insurance cover damage if things got ugly? Before I could respond, Marlo raised her voice. "I'm ordering you to cease operations immediately. You're creating a hazard, and I'm within my rights to protect this community." The crew chief looked at me, uncertainty written across his face. This was the moment, the pivot point. If I backed down now, told them to pack up and leave, Marlo would know she could push me around forever. But if I held firm, if I told them to keep drilling, I was betting everything that the law would actually protect me. I thought about the cameras recording this, about the lawyer in Austin who'd told me to document everything, about the previous owner who'd walked away quietly and lost everything. "Keep drilling," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm the property owner. I'm responsible. Keep working." Marlo's expression hardened. She turned to one of her people and said something I couldn't hear. The man pulled out his phone and made a call. Meanwhile, the drill bit continued grinding down into the earth, the sound somehow defiant now, a mechanical middle finger to everyone who wanted me gone. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. We all just stood there in the morning sun, waiting. Then Marlo turned back to me, and her voice dropped lower, more personal. "You think you're being brave. You think you're standing up for yourself. But, Cade," she used my first name like we were friends, like this was a private conversation, "you're gambling with something you can't afford to lose. This land has been in development planning for 3 years. We have investors, contracts, timelines. You're a complication we didn't anticipate, but you're not insurmountable." The threat was clear. I'm not a person to her. I'm an obstacle, a problem to be solved. "If this land is so important to your plans," I said, keeping my phone steady, "then maybe you should have bought it properly instead of forcing someone into bankruptcy." Her jaw tightened. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" I smiled without humor. "I have a letter from the Railroad Commission, geological survey from 2022. I have emails showing the previous owner knew about the lithium deposits. And I have a timeline showing his foreclosure happened suspiciously fast after he filed that survey request. I watched her process that information and saw the moment she realized I had ammunition. I've already shared all of it with my lawyer, I continued, and with the Texas Attorney General's office. So, if you want to keep threatening me, keep going, but know that everything you say right now is being recorded and will end up in a courtroom. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of another vehicle approaching. I turned and saw a police cruiser coming up the access road, a light bar flashing. My stomach dropped for a second. Had Marlo called them first? But then I recognized the driver from my research. The sheriff, the one who'd been unhelpful when I'd reported the cameras. He parked and climbed out, surveying the scene with the expression of a man who really didn't want to be here. "Got a call about trespassing and illegal drilling," he said, walking toward us. "What's going on?" Marlo spoke first. "Sheriff, I'm Marlo Vance. My company has been in negotiations to purchase this property. Mr. Brennan is conducting drilling operations without notifying the county, potentially creating environmental hazards. I've requested he cease operations until proper assessments can be conducted." The sheriff looked at me. "Is that true? You got permits for this?" I'd prepared for this. "This is private property, private geological survey. Texas law doesn't require county permits for test drilling on private land. I've got the documentation if you need to see it." The crew chief stepped forward, pulling folded papers from his jacket. "We're licensed by the state. All our equipment is certified. We're in full compliance." The sheriff took the papers, glanced at them, and handed them back. He looked uncomfortable, caught between a local businesswoman with money and power and a property owner who technically wasn't breaking any laws. "Mr. Brennan," he said finally, "you've got a right to survey your own land, but if there's a dispute about ownership or if there are safety concerns—" Marlo interrupted. "There are safety concerns, and there is a dispute. The previous foreclosure may have irregularities. We're seeking legal review." I pulled out my phone, a different one, not the one still recording, and showed the sheriff the deed. "Recorded with the county clerk 3 weeks ago. Legal purchase, no liens, no disputes filed. If she wants to challenge it, she can do that through the courts. But right now, today, I'm the legal owner, and I'm conducting legal survey work." The sheriff studied the deed, then looked back at Marlo. I could see him making calculations, deciding which side of this would cause him less trouble. Then something unexpected happened. A second vehicle pulled up, a sedan, this time government plates. A woman got out wearing a blazer with an ID badge clipped to her belt. She walked straight to the sheriff, and they talked quietly for a minute. Then she approached me. "Mr. Brennan, I'm with the Attorney General's Office Resource Crimes Division. We received your complaint yesterday. I'm here to observe and gather preliminary information." I felt relief wash through me, so intense it was almost physical. The lawyer had moved faster than I'd expected, gotten someone out here to witness what was happening. The investigator looked at Marlo. "Ma'am, are you interfering with legal surveying activity on private property?" Marlo's composure finally cracked just slightly. "I'm protecting legitimate business interests and community safety." The investigator made a note on her tablet. "We'll need to interview you separately, and I'll need contact information for your company's legal department." She turned to the crew chief. "Please continue your work. Document everything you're doing. We may need it for the investigation." The next 20 minutes were a blur. The investigator took statements from everyone, me, Marlo, the crew chief, even some of Marlo's people. The sheriff stood off to the side, looking like he wished he was anywhere else. And through it all, the drill kept turning, kept pushing deeper into the ground, getting closer to whatever was buried 800 feet down. When the investigator was done with me, she handed me her card. "Keep documenting, stay safe, and if anyone interferes with this survey or threatens you in any way, call me immediately." Marlo and her people left without another word, trucks pulling away in formation, and I watched them go with my heart still racing. The crew chief walked over, wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "That was intense," he said. "You have bigger problems than I thought." I nodded, too drained to speak. We'd won this round. Barely. But Marlowe's parting look had been clear this wasn't over, not by a long shot. That evening, as the sun set and the drilling rig fell silent for the night, the crew chief called me over to where they'd set up their equipment. "Got the first core samples," he said. "Won't have full analysis until the lab work's done, but..." He held up a section of rock gray and dense with flecks of white crystal running through it. "That's lithium carbonate. High concentration consistent throughout the sample. If the other test holes show the same thing, you're sitting on something major." I took the sample, felt the weight of it in my hand. This small piece of rock was worth more than everything I'd ever owned combined. This was what Marlowe had killed for, what the previous owner had died trying to protect. And now it was mine if I could survive long enough to claim it. The call came 10 days later, while I was replacing rotted boards on the porch steps. Austin area code. My lawyer's voice was tight with controlled excitement. "Lab results are back. 12,000 tons of lithium carbonate concentration, higher than the preliminary survey estimated. Current market value $52 million. We're filing everything today." I sat down hard on the step I'd just hammered into place, the number echoing in my head. 52 million. Not the land, not the house, just what was buried underneath waiting. "What happens now?" I asked. He took a breath. "Civil suit against Vance Holdings for coercion, fraud, and tortious interference. Criminal complaint to the Texas Attorney General for violations of Penal Code 32.45. And I've contacted the FBI. Bank fraud crosses into federal jurisdiction. They're already looking at Iris and her communications with Marlowe. This is going to move fast." It did. 3 days later, the Austin American-Statesman ran the story on page 1, CEO accused of manipulating bankruptcy to seize lithium deposits. The article laid it all out. The previous owner's foreclosure timeline. The geological survey. My allegations backed by documentation the investigator had verified. Marlowe's history of similar land acquisitions in New Mexico that had raised questions but never led to charges. By evening, it had been picked up by the Associated Press. My phone rang constantly, journalists wanting interviews, the lawyer screening every call, advising me to say nothing beyond the basic facts. Let the evidence speak. Don't give Marlowe ammunition for a defamation claim. That night, I sat in the kitchen with all the lights off, watching news vans set up outside my gate, satellite dishes pointing at the sky. This was what going public looked like. No more quiet threats, no more backroom pressure, everything exposed under floodlights. The FBI arrived on day 4. 2 agents in dark suits who spent 6 hours going through my documentation, taking copies of everything, asking detailed questions about every interaction with Marlowe, every call from the bank, every instance of the town, refusing to do business with me. They were professional, thorough, and gave nothing away about what they were thinking. But before they left, the lead agent told me something that made my chest tighten. "We've been looking at Vance Holdings for 18 months. Different case, different state. Your complaint gives us leverage we didn't have before. Stay available. This is going to trial." Marlowe was arrested on day 7. I watched it on the news, federal agents walking her out of her office building, in handcuffs, cameras everywhere, her face stone blank as reporters shouted questions. 3 charges: coercion in business transactions, under Texas law, 2 to 10 years. Wire fraud under federal statute up to 20 years. Conspiracy to commit bank fraud up to 30 years. Bail was set at $500,000, which she posted within 2 hours. Iris didn't fare better. The bank fired her the same day Marlowe was arrested, and by the end of the week she'd been charged separately with bribery and breach of fiduciary duty. Bank investigators had found $75,000 transferred from an account controlled by Vance Holdings to Iris's personal account, dated 2 months before the previous owner's foreclosure. The evidence was damning, undeniable, the kind of paper trail that ended careers and started prison sentences. The bank issued a public apology. They canceled the additional assessment requirement, restored my mortgage to its original terms, and offered a settlement for the harassment, $50,000, I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. I took it. Used it to pay the survey company the lawyer's retainer to fix the electrical system and replace the water pump that had been sabotaged while I wasn't looking. By the end of the month, Vance Holdings had collapsed. 4 major investors pulled out. The company's assets were frozen pending the criminal trial. And Marlo, the woman who had shown up at my gate with 4 trucks and 72 hours worth of threats, was facing the real possibility of spending the next decade in federal prison. My lawyer called with updates every few days. Plea negotiations were happening. The prosecution had offered a deal: 6 years federal time, $1.2 million in fines, and a 15-year ban from real estate investment. Marlo's attorneys were pushing back, but the evidence was overwhelming. Eventually, he said she'd take it. They always did when the alternative was rolling the dice on a 30-year maximum. I should have felt victorious, should have felt vindicated. But mostly I just felt tired, hollowed out. I'd won, but the cost had been weeks of fear, isolation, and stress that had aged me in ways I couldn't quite measure. The previous owner hadn't survived this fight. I had, but I understood now why he'd chosen to walk away. Some battles take more than they give back, even when you win. 3 months later, the ranch looked different, not transformed. I wasn't that ambitious, but lived in. The porch had new boards that didn't creak when you stepped on them. The roof no longer leaked when it rained. The electrical system worked reliably, and the well pump delivered clean water without sputtering or dying halfway through a shower. Small victories, but they meant something. They meant I was building instead of just surviving. I'd signed a mineral rights contract with a lithium extraction company out of Denver, reputable, established, with environmental protocols that satisfied even the most aggressive regulators. 18% royalty on gross revenue, with me retaining full ownership of the surface land. The lawyers had negotiated for 2 weeks, but the final terms were better than I'd hoped. Estimated income, $600,000 to $900,000 per year for the next 15 years. Numbers that still didn't feel real when I said them out loud. The first royalty check arrived in July. I paid off the mortgage, completely set aside money for taxes, and bought a new truck to replace the one that was held together mostly by rust and optimism. The rest went into an account. I tried not to think about it too much because thinking about it made me remember the price I'd paid to get here. But the money wasn't the part that mattered most. What mattered was standing on the porch in the evening with a beer in my hand, watching the sun set over land that was mine, legally and completely, with no one trying to take it away. That feeling, security, ownership, peace, was worth more than any number in a bank account. Quinn had started visiting more often. Not for legal work, the case was mostly over, just waiting on Marlo's sentencing hearing in August, but because he seemed to like the quiet out here. We'd sit on the porch and talk about nothing important. Books we'd read, places we'd traveled before life got complicated. His failed marriage, mine. The ways we'd both ended up in careers we hadn't planned on, fighting battles we'd never expected. One evening in late July, he brought dinner steaks he'd picked up from a butcher in Austin, potatoes, beer that was actually cold. We cooked on the grill I'd salvaged from the barn, ate while the sky turned purple and gold. And somewhere in the middle of the meal, I realized this felt like something I hadn't experienced in years. Normal, easy, the kind of friendship that didn't require performance or pretense. "You did good," Quinn said, setting down his beer. "Most people would have sold. Take the money and run." I shrugged. "Most people are smarter than me?" He smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe most people don't have whatever stubborn thing you've got that won't let you quit." I thought about that, the stubbornness that had kept me in the cockpit through bad weather, that had made me buy this ranch when anyone sensible would have walked away, that had driven me to fight instead of fold when Marlo showed up with her threats and her trucks. Maybe it was stupidity. Maybe it was a survival instinct. Either way, it has kept me alive. The previous owner's cousin called in August. I'd tracked down his contact information and sent him updates throughout the investigation. Now he wanted to thank me in person, said he was driving through Texas next month and would like to stop by. We talked for 20 minutes about his cousin. A quiet man who'd loved this land, who'd worked it for 15 years before the lithium survey changed everything. He would have fought if he'd known help was coming, the cousin said. But he thought he was alone, thought nobody would believe him over someone like Marlo Vance. I understood that, the isolation, the feeling that the system was rigged against you and resistance was futile. I'd felt it too, standing in my kitchen with a foreclosure notice and no clear path forward. The difference was, I'd found help, found someone who believed me, found enough evidence to make the truth impossible to ignore. Marlo's sentencing happened on August 15th. 6 years federal prison, $1.2 million in fines, 15-year ban from real estate transactions. The judge had been harsh, noting her previous near prosecution in New Mexico, her pattern of predatory business practices, her complete lack of remorse. I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't need to. Quinn sent me a text with the results, and I read it standing on the porch where this had all started, where I'd first seen those headlights coming toward me in the dark. Justice had been served. Not perfectly. The previous owner was still gone, his life still destroyed, but as well as could be managed given the circumstances. That evening I drove out to the northern boundary, where the drill rig had been, where the test holes were capped, now marked with steel posts. Leave a comment, hit like, subscribe, and if you'd like to help the channel grow, that little thanks button down below means a lot.